Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I'm your host, Kayla Fisk, and today we're going to be going over hawk ID and more broadly, raptor ID, with a particular focus on raptors that are found in the northeastern parts of North America. So, first, we have to know what exactly is a raptor. They're also called birds of prey. And these are birds that hunt and feed on other animals. They could be diurnal, which means active during the day, like their hawks, eagles, and falcons, or nocturnal, like owls. In this episode, we're going to be going over the diurnal raptors, so the hawks, eagles, falcons, and vultures. So, some of the main characteristics that you'll see in a raptor or bird of prey is excellent eyesight, hooked beak, and strong talons. So while there may be other birds that may prey on other animals, like shrikes, for example, they don't fit these characteristics that we associate with raptors. So they don't have that as acute eyesight as a bird of prey would. They do have the hook beak, but they don't have those talons that are also associated. So hence they're not considered a raptor. So another thing you may find very surprising when we talk about raptors is they're not very closely related at all. They're actually put together by their characteristics more so than relationship. So our hawks and eagles, as we can see on the left, are actually very closely related to each other. But then if we look at owls, they're actually more closely related to the nightjars than hawks and eagles. And again, falcons are more closely related to parrots. And our New World vultures are more closely related to storks than the other groups. So when we talk about raptors in Eastern North America, we generally break them down into several categories based on family groups. So we have our Buteos, think of our red-tailed hawks, for example, the Accipiters. They used to be called the Accipiters, but due to some recent reclassification, now they are in all different family groups. So many refer to these now as the Cipitrines, and that's the sharp-shinned Coopers and goshawk. We have our vultures, New World vultures, our falcons, our eagles, and several oddball groups that are a party of one, like the northern harrier and the osprey. So let's first start with our main group, and that is the Buteos. So again, these are our red-tailed hawks, our broad-winged hawks, red-shouldered, and rough legs. And they do have some overall overreaching characteristics. They have long, broad wings, usually a short, broad tail, and are often seen soaring. Their main diet also includes small mammals. Our most common buteo is the red-tailed hawk. They range anywhere from 3.2 to 4.5 foot wingspan. They are also our largest buteo in eastern North America, and they have 16 subspecies. And up in New York and other northeastern states, the borealis subspecies is our most typical one we'll see. We'll also see Abdicola and some of the other more westerly subspecies every once in a while. These species prefer, red-tailed hawks prefer wide open areas. They are built for soaring, scanning open fields and everything for their main prey. They so many of these birds of prey also they can be distinguished by their flight pattern. So I'll talk a little bit about each of their flight patterns as we go through. So the red-tailed hawk tends to have a very shallow, fluid wing beat about it and will be often seen soaring, so not flapping as much. So in flight, some of the things that we'll be looking for are the patagial bars, which this is that dark line, leading line on the upper part of their wings that we see here. They also have some nice dark commas that can be seen a little bit farther out, closer to the wingtip than the patagial bars. They also have a little bit of a bulging, muscular looking secondaries to them. So if you look at this bird, as we go from the primaries to the secondaries, it kind of bows out a little bit, giving them a little bit of a muscular appearance. Red tails, another good thing to look for when IDing them is this nice defined belly band. This will vary greatly between subspecies and individuals. So it could be barely there, or it could be almost a solid belly band, depending on the subspecies. And as their name implies, the adult red tail will have a red tail, and that can be diagnostic. If you see a bird flying overhead, Buteo with a red tail, you definitely have a red-tailed hawk. Juveniles, there instead of that red characteristic tail, you will have a brown tail with very thin barring on it. So, another characteristic you look for to help ID a red tail is this white V on their scapulars. You can see it in this perched bird and the bird in flight on the left. And this also demonstrates what the tail looks like from above when you have a juvenile, with that brown and black barring. The next beauty we're going to go over is the broadwing hawk. They are our smallest buteo in eastern North America, with a wingspan of about 32 to 39 inches, which brings them to about the size of a crow. They're also a very social migrant. They're going to start passing through numbers from mid to late April is when they'll start, and they can be passing through in groups of thousands. It's quite the sight to see, and it's always a spectacular to see them when they're passing through at hawk watching sites. They're also a one of the more long distant migrants we have. So in flight, there are several things to look for. They tend to be a very small and chunky buteo. They have a very barred underside with a dark trailing edge, like we can see in this guy. At their wingtips, they also have 4 fingers. So these are these little finger projections we see at the very tip of the wing. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that gives them a more pointed appearance because they only have those finger projections. In their tail, there is very boldly patterned with a black end, a one bold white wing bar, and then black. One of our other Buteos we have is the red-shouldered hawk. They're a little bit bigger with a wingspan of 36 to 43 inches. And they tend to be like to being found in wet forests. They like amphibians and reptiles to eat. Also, when they're flying, a lot of times they will project or bring their wings forward a little bit when they're soaring. So that can help distinguish them between the other Buteos. And their flight style is similar to the red-tailed hawk, but a little bit more quicker. It's sometimes it's said that their appearance compares to a buteo trying to mimic an accipiter based on their wing shape. So in flight, this is an adult. We'll be looking for the reddish body with the reddish wing coverts. Um, and compared to the broadwing, when we look at these barring on the tail, these guys have a thin white barring. So we can actually see 2 lines of white versus the broadwing where we'll just see one extra thick white bar across the tail. Instead of the 4 fingers on the broadwing, the red shoulders have these 5 fingers. So that gives them a little bit more of a squared or rounded look to their wings versus the pointed on the broadwing. And one thing to really look for a red-shouldered is that when the light shines through their feathers, it creates a little bit of a light crescent towards the tip of the wings, as you can see on this guy right here. Great ID point to look for, because that will be found in both adults and juveniles. So here we have our juvenile. They are just a mess of different dark brown streaking on their chest. They still have that light crescent, as we can see here, and they don't have that dark trailing edge. They still have those 5 fingers, and the white barring might not be as noticeable on these juveniles. So the last beauty we are going to go over is the rough-legged hawk. These guys have about a 48 to 56 inch wingspan. They're also a winter visitor. They will typically spend their breeding season up farther north, and depending on the weather, migration patterns, etc., they will move farther south into our area for just the winter months. And then once spring arrives, they'll be heading back up north to their breeding grounds. These guys come in a light and dark morph, which we'll show in the next few slides. They're also one of the only 3 species with feathered legs. So if you see a bird of prey with feathered legs. This it definitely helps you narrow down your possibilities, and this is one of the three. The other two are ferruginous, which we really don't have around here, and the golden eagle. Their flight style is pretty steady, and they have methodical wing beats. So in flight, a couple of things that we'll be looking for is this very solid dark belly band. And that's a lot more solid of a color than you'd see in a red tail. And also these two dark carpal bars right at the joints of their wings. Um, and their tail, they have a nice light base with a dark tip to it. And here's an example of a light morph and a dark morph. As you can see with the dark morph, those carpal bars aren't as obvious, but they have a nice dark body with light silvery flight feathers. Next, we have the Accipitrines, and that comprises of the Cooper's hawk, the sharp-shinned hawk, and the American goshawk. So, unlike the Buteos, these guys are built for maneuverability. They're often living in forests or areas with dense cover, so they need to be able to weave in and out of trees to catch birds, which is their main diet. So, to do that, they have evolved very short, broad wings and a long, thin tail to give them the best maneuverability to catch their fast moving prey. So, the first accipitrine we're going to go over is the Cooper's hawks. They have a wingspan of 24 to 39 inches. And one great thing about these accipitrines is they have a very distinctive flight style. So if you watch them, they'll do like a flap, flap, and then glide, and just repeat that over and over again. And that stands out more compared to like the Buteos, who will just be mainly soaring and have wing beats sporadically thrown out between them. Their wing beats are also very strong but stiff wing beats from the body and not at the wrists. Because they're larger and have a bit more larger wings, they tend to also be more steady in flight. And they tend to migrate solo, so you won't see them migrating in groups. They'll be just passing by themselves. So now let's look at how to ID a Cooper's hawk in flight. Um, with this accipitrine body plan, we see we have the nice long tail and the shorter, more rounded, broad wings for maneuverability. And the main species that you'll be trying to differentiate the Cooper's hawk with is the sharp-shinned. So with its Coopers, we'll be looking for this nice rounded tail. This rounded tail is created by the outer tail feathers are shorter than the inner ones, creating that little graduated appearance. They also tend to have a little bit of a longer tail in proportion to their body than a sharp-shinned. And another thing we want to look for is this head projection. So in the Cooper's hawks, their head goes a lot more forward past this leading edge of their wings than a sharp-shin would. And then juveniles, they'll have a dark brown defined teardrop markings on their chest. So in juveniles, we're looking for that. So now we're to the sharp-shinned. They look very similar to the Coopers, but they are our smallest accipiter with a wingspan of 17 to 21 inches, which brings them to be about the size of a blue jay or a robin. Like the Coopers, they have a very quick and snappy flight style, but more from the wrist than the Coopers. And because they are smaller, they tend to look a little bit more buoyant or unsteady in flight, but they still have that same flap flap glide style flight pattern as the Coopers. So now let's look at what we're looking for a sharp-shinned in flight. These guys tend to hunch up their wings a little bit more, creating a little pocket where their head is, and it doesn't quite go as much past this leading edge as a Cooper. So they tend to have a little bit of a smaller head and a shrug shoulder appearance. Their tail is also more shorter proportioned than a Cooper's, as we can see here. It's a pretty shorter tail with a squared end. So all of their tail feathers are the same length, creating that squared appearance. So now let's compare the Sharpshin and Cooper side by side so we can get a better feel of how these different field marks look compared to each other. So, as we discussed, the tail shape is different. We can see our nice rounded tail on our Coopers and our squared off tail on our Sharpshinned. These also has a nice demonstration of the head projection. With the Coopers, it goes a lot farther past this leading edge, where with the Sharpshinned on the left, it it is a lot more sunken in and is not as prominent as the Coopers. The tail is longer and the Coopers and shorter in the Sharpshinned. And if we look at the barring on the two upper birds, which are the juveniles, we can see the difference in those dark barrings. On the Coopers on the right, they're nicely defined teardrop pattern markings, where on the upper left with the Sharpshinned, it's a lot more messy looking. And some of the features we are looking at to differentiate these two can be different when they're in a perched position. So Sharpshinned, I see I accidentally flipped these two. So we actually have our Sharpshinned on the right and our Coopers on the left. Coopers have caps, so we can see this dark marking on its head ends on the top of its head and doesn't go all down the back and connect with this darker mantle. Where in the Sharpshinned on the right, that dark part on its head goes all the way down its nape and connects the back. Cooper's hawk tend to have a fierce look to them. They look intimidating like a predator, where a sharp-shinned tends to have a bug-eyed look to it, and it looks kind of goofy looking sometimes. Again, Cooper's hawk on the left is crow-sized versus the robin-sized or blue jay-sized sharp-shinned on the right. Sharpshins also tend to have very thin looking legs, where the Cooper's is more sturdy looking. And again, that rounded versus square tail field mark is also visible when they're perched. Cool thing about the Accipitrines, particularly Sharpshin and Coopers, is you can generally somewhat age them based on their eye color. This is an illustration I did based on the color progression of a Cooper's hawk. When they first hatch and fledge, they have a bluish gray looking eye color. And as they get older, that will turn to a yellow, and then an orange, and then eventually a deep dark red. So this is also a nice feature to help differentiate the Cipitrines from a falcon. A falcon will always have a dark eye, where the Cipitrines will have a colorful eye, anywhere from this light gray to a dark red. And the last Accipiter we're going to go over is the American goshawk. This is our largest, and with a wingspan of 40 to 47 inches. They have that same flat glide style, but it's more of a deeper wing beat, similar to a Buteo. It's again sometimes it's said it's an accipiter that looks like a Buteo with its wing shape and flight style. And this is a bird of mature forests. So an adult goshawk will be unmistakable. They have a nice dark slate gray body and wings. But the juveniles can be sometimes difficult to differentiate from a Cooper's, for instance. So one thing we definitely want to look for is this bold white eyebrow or supercilium. Um, this is not as bold as it can be. That white eye line could be actually pretty bold and distinctive in some individuals. They're also heavily marked all over, and they're much bulkier looking than a Cooper's hawk. They're more barrel chested than the Coopers. They also tend to have a more broader tail than the Coopers or Sharpshinned. And like I mentioned, an adult is not mistakable for anything else with this beautiful gray coloration to it. So next group we're going to go over is the Falcons. In the northeast, we have the American kestrel, the merlin, and the peregrine. So these birds have very long, thin, pointed wings and long tails. These species are built for speed, and they hunt on the wing. So the first one we're going to go over is the American kestrel. It is our smallest falcon with a wingspan of about 20 to 24 inches, which makes it about the size of a mourning dove. It likes to be found in open areas such as fields, and has a very light, fluttery wing beat to it. So we can see the American kestrel has the typical falcon shape with the long, thin, pointed wings, long tail. Um, the adult males will have a very orangey colored chest with some dots. Females will be more brownish overall with some heavy streaking. You can also see their faint malar stripes from this angle. Males will have a orange tail with a black terminal band, and females will have a brown tail with finer streaking on it. American kestrel is also sexually dimorphic, which means males and females look different. So on the left, we have an adult male with his very rusty colorations, slate gray head, and wings. And on the right, we have a female, which is more of a buffy brown color overall with some very fine black streakings and lacks that slate wing bar. The second falcon we're going to go over is the merlin. It is a little bit bigger than the American kestrel with a wingspan of 21 to 27 inches. It also likes open areas such as forest openings, grasslands, and particularly coastal areas. This bird is a menace to many shorebirds, as it likes the area and actively will hunt shorebirds. It also has a very direct, powerful flight. So in flight, this is a very heavily marked bird. You can see its faint malar stripe, its body, and its underwings are all very heavily patterned. It is a dark bird, and that really helps differentiate itself with the kestrel in flight. It has a shorter, more squared tail with black and white barring on it. And like the kestrel, it is sexually dimorphic. So the males are a more slate colored and the females are more brownish overall. And the last falcon we're going to go over is the peregrine. It is about the size of a crow with a wingspan of 39 to 43 inches. It is also one of the most widespread birds in the world, found in almost every single continent. Its flight style is very strong and quick with very shallow wing beats. Very distinctive when you see it flying around. It also is a solo migrant. So in flight, adult is very distinctive. It has a broad chest. That dark malar and helmet will be obvious most of the time. It also has broader wings than a merlin or kestrel. It is light underneath overall, especially compared to the merlin or the kestrel. And overall, they have just very pale with fine barring. And also note the very short squared tail. And this is an adult. Juveniles are more dark on their undersides with a lot of barring and fine streaking to them, but you can still see that shorter square tail with their typical falcon appearance of very long, thin, pointed wings with a hint of the malar stripes. And next, we're going to go over the eagles. In the Northeast and North America, we have two eagle species, the bald eagle and the golden eagle. So these are our largest raptors we have, and depending on the species, their diet will vary between fish, small mammals, waterfowl, or carrion. So first, let's go over our most common eagle species in all of North America, and that is the bald. With a wingspan of about 6 feet long, it has a varied diet, but it's often seen near bodies of water. It definitely has a preference for fish. This is also another solo migrant. Their flight is very distinctive with very slow, steady, deliberate wing flaps. And the adult is distinctive. There is no other bird we'll have where its body has a dark body and an all-white head and tail. And that is again just for the adults. They have very long board-like wings, held very straight, with a large head and a medium-length tail. But all bald eagles don't look like that. It actually can take up to 5 years for a bird to molt into that typical plumage with white head, white tail, dark body. As we can see on the images on the right, the left side is a young bird who's all brown and a just starting to lose that dark baby bill. And to the right of that, we have an adult with a nice full yellow bill, white head, white tail, and dark body. As we've discussed, it takes up to 5 years for the bald eagle to go from that juvenile plumage to the adult definitive plumage. So we have several images on the left showing what that progression typically looks like as each molt and each year goes by. They get more and more white to them until they finally get to their complete adult plumage. So here is a juvenile in flight. They are mostly brown with some white mottling throughout their body, and they have the same shape as the adult. And that white mottling will differ depending on the bird's age. The other eagle we have is the golden eagle. It has a 6 foot wingspan, and its flight style is a little bit different. It's more slow with shallow wing beats to it, often held in a slight dihedral, which is where their wings are held upward in a very shallow V. And because of that dihedral pattern, sometimes they can look like a turkey vulture when they're very far out. And they also tend to migrate either solo or in small groups of 2 or 3. So let's go over what a golden eagle looks like in flight. So overall, they do look very similar to a bald eagle, but there's a couple things you can look for to help you differentiate the two. So first of all, they have a smaller head than the bald eagle with a little bit of a longer tail. So it kind of looks like someone grabbed the tail and pulled it. So it looks like it's a little bit more proportioned towards the tail than the head. And the bald eagle has a pretty big head compared to the golden small one. And in good lighting, you can also see that golden nape that gives the golden eagle their name. In juveniles, you're going to be look for the patches of white. So in the bald eagle, that white markings can be modeled throughout their body. But in the golden, it's congregated in 3 areas: their tail base and the patches in their wing. So here is a nice comparison of the 2 juveniles. On the left, we have a bald eagle, and the right, a golden. So we can see this white modeling is just all over the body. It's not really congregated in one spot. There's a little bit on the tail, and the wing coverts, where in the golden, we just really see that bold white markings on the base of the tail and these little patches on their wings. So the last main group we're going to go over are the vultures. And in this group, we have 2 species, the turkey vulture and the black vulture. And the shape of these guys really matter between the two, are different between the 2 species. But both have their main prey as being carrion. So the turkey vulture has a pretty big wingspan with 67 to 70 inches. It also flies in a dihedral, a very strong dihedral at that, with their wings held up in a V shape. Because of that shape, they tend to look very wobbly in flight, rocking back and forth, and they're definitely very reluctant to flap. They also migrate and roost in decent sized groups. So for a turkey vulture, there's several different things we're going to be looking for to ID them. They overall have a very dark body, but their flight feathers, their primaries and secondaries, have a very silvery look to them, giving them a little bit of a 2-colored, 2-tone look. They have a longer tail, and adults have a small red head with white bill. The next vulture we're going to go over is the black vulture. These guys are a little bit smaller with a 54 to 60 inch wingspan. They're also highly social. If you're in their main range, it'll be expected to see them in groups. If you're in New York, where I am, we don't get them very often, and they do still tend to migrate through in groups of 2s or 3s. They also have a very distinctive flight style, with strong wing beats followed by a short glide. so much different than what we would see in a turkey vulture, for instance. They're also recently been seeing a range expansion, so they're becoming more and more common further up north. So when this bird's in flight, they're very distinctive looking too. Very long, broad wings, a very short, angular tail, a small gray head, and their wings also end in these very prominent fingers that we'll also see in the turkey vulture and the eagles. And unlike the turkey vulture, where it had a dark body with a silvery primaries and secondaries, the black vulture just has these white wingtips. So, one thing I often see is people confusing juvenile turkey vultures for black vultures. Juvenile turkey vultures will have a dark head when they're very young. That slowly will progress to a reddish tinge, then red as they mature. But when they're young, they can be confused with a black vulture. One thing to look for differentiating these guys is their bill shape. So we can see with the black vulture, it's very thin and narrow. And we don't see a really large nostril where we can see the other side. Where in these turkey vultures on the left, they have a very different head shape with very large prominent nares. And so now we get to the groups of birds where they're oddballs. They don't really fit in any of those other groups, so they're kind of put in their own separate little category. So the first bird that we're going to go over that has its own group is the northern harrier. These have a decent sized wingspan of 40 to 46 inches. And like the turkey vulture and the golden eagle, they will hold their wings in a very slight dihedral, or that V shape. They also look quite a bit different than your typical birds of prey, where they have a little bit of a facial disc going on, which is very similar to owls and is used the same way. They like to hunt over open fields, and they'll use that facial disc the same way as an owl would to help collect and funnel sounds to their ears to hunt. Because of that dihedral, they also tend to rock a little bit when they fly. So they look a little bit unsteady, and they'll have a very snappy wing beat. So in flight, what we're going to be looking for is a very light bird of prey, black with black wingtips, a gray head with a facial disc, and a prominent and a decently long tail. So this would be the male, or the gray ghost as many call them. The females are a lot more brown and streaky. And a good field mark to help ID these guys is their white rump patch. But just a word of caution, sometimes, especially Cooper's hawks, they have their white undertail coverts that sometimes can wrap up around their base of the tail, and it can give a little bit of an impression of a white rump patch. So make sure if you see a bird where you suspect it's a harrier based on that rump patch, make sure the other field marks fit the bird as well. So, just like the Merlin and Kestrel, the northern harrier is sexually dimorphic. Males are the gray ghost, that nice light silvery color, and females are an overall brownish. You can also even sex the juveniles by looking at their eye color. So we can see the male, they have a nice light eye color, where the juvenile female is dark. And the last bird that has its own category we're going to go over is the osprey. This is definitely one of the large birds with a wingspan of 4 to 6 feet, and they are a fish specialist. They actually have these little projections on the bottom of their feet that help them grasp fish. Another evolutionary trait they have to help them with their main diet is their outer toe. It can actually switch up to change their toe positions to help them grasp fish. Their flight style is very stiff, and it kind of looks similar in shape to a gull. So in flight, there are several things we want to look for to help us identify a bird as an osprey. They tend to have a very white body with these underwing coverts. Their primaries and secondaries and outer wings are very mottled of brown, are tend to be a lot more darker with heavy barring, and they also have these dark carpal patches. Not as prominent as we would see in the rough leg hawk, but very noticeable still. Um, they have a white head with a very dark eye stripe that is tended to be noticeable with a medium length tail. Also, when they're flying in a glide, often they will hold their wings upward in a little bit of an M shape. So the osprey is also sexually dimorphic. Females will have this nice little necklace on their neck, as we can see on this upper bird, and males will be all white, as we can see on this lower bird. You can tell juveniles from adults by a couple different factors. One is their eye color. As we can see on this bird on the lower left, it has a orange eye color, and that's typical for juveniles. And as they get older, that will change to a more bright yellow. And also, if we look on this lower left bird, we can see its wing coverts have a white tan colored point to them, and they will lose that as they mature. So those are the two things you can notice that will let you know that that bird is actually a juvenile. And that was the last of the birds of the Northeast. I hope you learned a little bit and got inspired to maybe check out your local hawk watching site. You can go to hawkmigrationassociation.org to find a hawk watching site near you. I highly recommend it. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And feel free to check out my birding academy for new birders at www.thebirdingacademy.com. And until next time, happy birding.